All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Max Bruening. It's June 23rd, 2023. We're at Ponzi Vineyards in Sherwood. Max, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for coming.
First question, why wine?
Why wine? I don't know. I don't know if there ever was a why wine for me. Starting out, I'm originally from Michigan, born and raised Traverse City. There is certainly a burgeoning wine industry there, focusing mainly on Germanic or Austrian aromatic whites, but we are producing some beautiful red wines there as well. But had no interest at that time. It was definitely an industry, but I was more into the arts. And at that point in my life, I was studying graphic design, so visual communication arts, and noticing a market for beer and wine bottle labels. I started kind of trying to pursue that a little bit with a buddy, and ideating and mocking up kind of pitches for labels. And that didn't work out, but in doing so, wine started capturing my attention and looking at it, kind of assessing it, starting to try it, thinking about it, realizing that there's an art within it. And then also, the science side, which I didn't pay too much attention to in my academic career. I was always very art focused. I did fine in the sciences. It just wasn't interesting, interesting enough to forced me to pursue it further. But evaluating wine is kind of where I found this beautiful medium between the both, and I didn't want to get rid of the art aspects in my life. And so I started kind of poking around wineries and talking to people. They didn't like my labels, but at least I was a hard worker and strong, and they're like, well, we could use you in a lot of ways.
This is still in Michigan?
Still in Michigan, yeah. So, I was working other jobs, but I had some free time, so I picked up a part-time gig with Chateau Grand Traverse, which is one of the pioneering wineries there, in the tasting room. So kind of learned the hospitality side, serving wine, talking about wine, doing as much research and exploring on my own, outside of work. But I really wanted to be in the cellar. I knew that going in. I really love working, especially physical work, and just the excitement and everything that has to do with winemaking and harvest. Excuse me. I wanted to be in there, but they wouldn't hire me because I could not commit to full time. I was going to school at the community college, and I was managing a pizza place, and I worked on the home that I was living in for these folks. And I couldn't get in there, so I volunteered my time during harvest. Any open day, any few hours, I would drive out there during harvest, and it was mainly cat management and cleaning tanks and cleaning drains, but that was fine. It was exciting and fun. I was there for a couple years, kind of on and off. I transferred out of the community college and graduated from Northwest Michigan Community College is where I got my associates in applied sciences and liberal arts. I transferred over to the University of Michigan, where I kind of took a deep dive into the hard sciences. I was on the pre-med track, focusing mainly on microbiome and chemistry. They have a department within the University of Michigan's LSNA, which is the Literature, Science, and Arts, called the PITE program, which is Program in the Environment, and that was the greenest I could get at the University of Michigan. Thinking back, probably should have went to state. They have one of the best ag programs in the world, but Michigan is where I was at, and I loved it. So I really focused on as many environmental and science, environment/science related programs I could do in there. And so I came out with a couple specializations in soil chemistry and terrestrial ecology, but bachelor's and microbiome and chem and it was very enlightening. I knew that I didn't want to study wine. I knew I didn't want to get a degree in enology and or viticulture because for me at that time was a limiting thing where if I dove into the world and I didn't like it 5 years down the road and I paid my way through school, to me that's not necessarily a great investment. So I wanted to focus something on a little bit more broad, but has an application, right? So, thinking about microbiome and chem, it's all applicable, right? And the fermentation sciences. And so at that same time, I was working on my final project or my thesis, if you want to call it that. And I was targeting wineries in northern Michigan, and one that I targeted was Black Star Farms, and I interviewed Lee Lutz, who's the head winemaker, managing partner. I don't know what his title is nowadays, but he's one of my mentors and a very, very good friend. But I drove up to Travers and interviewed him, and we started talking. He's like, "Well, what are you doing, for harvest?" I'm like, "Well, I'm in school." He's like, "Well, how flexible are you?" And I'm like, I can be flexible. And so I arranged my schedule in a way where basically I had an early morning Thursday lab, and I'd drive up to Travers and I'd work with them as long as I could, throughout the weekend, and drive back to Ann Arbor on Sunday. And I did that for quite a few weeks, and that resulted in a job. So after graduating from Michigan, I went back to Travers and I worked with Lee at the Sutton's Bay location, focusing on Pinot, and their barrel-aged Chardonnay was there as well, and some other aromatic whites as well. They have the two locations, one on Old Mission and one on Leelanau Peninsula, which are both separate AVAs, which is really interesting. So I was there and, continued learning, soaking it in, feeling a sponge. Knew I wanted to travel and do the harvest hopping thing, fresh out of school, single. And I had no interest in California. And he said, well, don't be naive. There's places outside of Napa and Sonoma. And he happened to have a good friend who was a GM at a winery just outside of Paso. And I interviewed with the winemaker, and that was pretty much a shoo-in. So I packed up and did a long road trip across country and moved to California, and I was there for about half a year working at a winery just outside of Paso and Templeton and the Adelaide Hills, and worked with a lot of Rhone varietals, which was great and fun because it is a whole different world compared to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But had the time to travel around, head down to San Luis Obispo and explore the Etna Valley and Santa Maria, and just kind of did as much as I could when I wasn't working. From there I went to New Zealand and did a stint there, which was fun. It was higher production, wasn't a huge interest, but again, going back to my mentor, he said, at the very least do a harvest, see if it's something that you like, because you might be surprised. And I figured out that it wasn't what I wanted. It's not that I didn't like it, but it wasn't what I wanted. And it helped me kind of hone in what my sweet spot was, which happens to be about our, volume here at Ponzi. After New Zealand, coupled with my girlfriend of almost 10 years now, who got into grad school at Pacific University and received her doctorate from there, that's what kind of brought us to Oregon. We were kind of at a crossroads in our life and relationship, and neither of us were going to compromise on our career goals, and there were only a handful of places that she could go to school, and I also continue making wine, and Oregon was one of them, and we got very lucky, very fortunate that she was accepted to one of the schools that was at the top of her list, and I had a harvest gig with Penner Ash. So I worked with Lynn in 2015. We moved out here in 2015, and this has been home since then. So did a harvest, begged to stay on as long as I could, begged for employment, and well into November, they're like, Max, you've cleaned everything 3 times. We can't keep paying you just to keep cleaning what you've already cleaned. And so I left it there, but kind of around the same time, which was cool, is as a harvest crew, we toured Ponzi. And it was led by JP, who was the assistant winemaker at the time, and Louisa. and it was a awesome tour and informative. And we ended up in the tasting room, and she was kind of going around, Louisa, making short talk with people, and came around to me, and we started talking. She's like, "Oh, well, where are you from?" And I said, Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan. She's like, "Oh, I know a winemaker there." And without really thinking, I was like, "Oh, is it Lee Lutz?" And she's like, "Yeah, it is. That's weird." And it just so happened that they had met many years ago. He was working for Lisbetta, so daughter of the Vieri family, and Louisa, the Ponzis, have a relationship with them. And they met and formed a friendship at that time. And, not a stay in touch every year kind of thing, but throughout the wine world, which seems big, but is very small. Maintained a relationship and a sense of communication. And so I'm sure she reached out to him, and I reached out to him, and kind of, I asked if she was hired, and she said yes. And so I applied and went through a couple interviews, and I started here in January of 2016, and this is where I've been. At that time, Louisa was working to kind of expand the tasting team. For a long time, it was her and Josh and whoever her assistant winemaker was at the time, and kind of opening that up a little bit more to experienced individuals who not only just did harvest hopping, but had year-round exposure to the winemaking, scene and program in general. And so I was hired on as a cellar associate, but also part of the tasting group. And so, kind of my progression here, cellar associate, and that grew into taking on the role as our packaging coordinator. So trying to grow in any way I could that was really production focused. And so learning the operation from the dry goods standpoint of sourcing material, right? Glass, bottles, corks, you name it. They're all needed for us to do what we do, but then also building relationships within the community and vendors that the Ponzis had worked with for years or hadn't worked with for years, and rebuilding relationships and kind of bringing Ponzi back to top of mind in terms of our presence in the world of packaging, and staying on top with new innovations, sustainability efforts of eco-friendly or lightweight glass or recycled material within corrugation. That's a huge thing for us and a lot of people in the valley, but a huge thing for the Ponzi family in general. I mean, that's been top of mind since day one, simply because that's just what you do. It's the right thing to do. I think that's important. To do what we do is. It's everything we do out here, right? From the farming to our footprint here at the winery, and capturing rainwater, and it doesn't stop there. It should go into your packaging and sourcing recycled material and lighter weight options. But anyways, so I was doing that, grew to cellar master after a couple years, and then assistant winemaker, and now associate, and that's where I stand today. I work very intimately with Louisa on a lot of bigger scope projects, but I also work very intimately with Julia, our assistant winemaker and enologist. So I'm kind of the in between, where I will work on day-to-day and week-to-week stuff with Julia, and then work on kind of the month-to-month, year-to-year with Louisa, and it's this great kind of middle in between. We're a trio. It's super healthy. The communication's great, and honestly, I don't think Ponzi has ever been at a better place than now in terms of the post acquisition and our projection forward, and the winemaking is immaculate, and the wines that we're producing are beautiful, and I think it's a result of this team that we've put together and our crew. We have a cellar lead, Ilario, who has been with the company for a very long time, since 2012, I think, who just knows the ins and outs of this place, and I've learned a great deal from him and others who have been here for some time as well.
So you mentioned early on in the process, as you were coming sort of discovering wine and sort of poking around the industry, that you knew production was where you wanted to be, and you kind of mentioned like the physicality of it. So tell me about your initial work in production as an intern, as a volunteer.
Yeah.
What was it like? Was it what you expected, and what made you want to keep doing it?
I love the intensity. I think production people are kind of junkies in that way. And then it's like, you know, building that out, right? So what kind of junkie are you? You know, is it just the brute force? Is it the labor? Is it, you know, working towards a goal, creating something, efficiencies, inefficiencies, correcting those inefficiencies? You know, I think every winemaker will say there's a bit of control, and they're very type A. You know, for me, I think it's a little bit of everything. I love working hard. I love the physicality. But as I've spent more time with wine and just kind of stepping back and looking, you know, into it, what I realize is in a growing age of technology and information and you know, just how we're progressing as humans in general, there are very still few things that we've been doing since like our inception. Wine is one of those things, right? Humans have been making wine for over 8,000 years. And to be a part of something like that, I mean, and it's not just wine, right? It's beer, it's baking, it's, you know, there are these things that are just still so human that to me is captivating. And to be a part of that, to feel a part of that is pretty important. It's also interesting because it's a job or career, however you want to see it, that revolves around one very pivotal moment, and that's harvest. And you get one shot, right? You get one shot to do it. It's not like beer making. It's not like spirits, where if you have an issue, you can get on the phone and order more of this, more of that, start over. I think there's a little arrogance in there, but I don't think it's a negative thing. It's that it helps fuel that drive to, this is the moment, this is our time, this is really the opportunity to do the best we absolutely can with what we have and push the limits. To create something is cool, and it's very I don't know, for me it's rewarding and valuable. And yes, at the end of harvest, you kind of die a little bit, you know, but during harvest, it's almost like you recognize it, you suppress it, you keep going. And I think that love for it is what allows us to do what we do, because there are certain people that can't do it. And I've witnessed this, you know, where I've been an intern at a place and somebody from either the restaurant side of things or hospitality come in and they're done in a day or two. They had no idea. I had a bit of expectation, never the extent, and Oregon was an eye-opener for me. The physicality of Oregon harvest far exceeded any harvest I had ever done, ever worked. And you know, it's a lot of small lot fermentations, a lot of movements, a lot of cap management, and it was impressive. You know, you lose a lot of weight, you get really strong, and you know, and then you die afterwards. But and I do impress that upon, you know, when I'm interviewing for interns, you know, it's tough, and it's fast, and you know, they're like, yeah, no, it's like, no, you don't yet till you come and you do it. And most times people are like, oh, I get what you meant then, you know. But again, it's rewarding. So. Yeah, I don't think anything was really a surprise, because I've labored my entire life, which kind of set me up for that. Thankful for my parents instilling the work ethic into me and my brother that they did. But sometimes it's grueling. Sometimes you hate it. Sometimes you have to take a beat and count to 5, and you know, I mean, it's like any job. It throws you in different directions. But I fell in love with it immediately, and I knew I wanted more, and I knew I wanted just to push it as far as I could go. But you know, you reach a point where if you really want to grow in your career, you got to land somewhere, and you have to spend time there. I know many winemakers that move around, every 3 or 4 years, which is fine, and they do their thing. But to really understand a place, to really get in tune with, the vineyards and their various ages and the style of winemaking and vintage to vintage variability, you need to plant your feet, and you need to stick around for a bit. And I loved that about Ponzi. It's one of the pioneering families and wineries, and there's a ton of history. I love that it was still owned and operated by the family, and they were present. And even with the acquisition, and Bollinger is big, but it's still family owned and operated, and they respect and respected what the Ponzis did, and they respect what they're trying to do now. And for the most part, it's hands off. They wouldn't have bought us if all the right things were in place, and they were. And I love that. They visit once or twice a year, and it's great. And we have wonderful meetings and seminars and education, courses and the works. But for the most part, they're hands off. They know that we've got it, and we're doing a great job, and that's super reassuring. It allows us to continue our craft and our art and the style of winemaking that Dick started and Louisa built upon, and myself, Julia, are continuing, with our added, thoughts and impressions, of course. But I think Ponzi's future is pretty bright, I would say.
I'm curious about sort of a compare contrast. You mentioned Traverse City to Paso to New Zealand, and then eventually to Oregon. Before we talk about Oregon, tell me about the other spots you worked. How did they compare? How did they build on each other? And what were sort of the main takeaways you had from your various stops along the way?
Sure. Yeah. So starting at the beginning, Michigan and Oregon's history are very interesting because they mirror each other. Vines went into the ground, mid to late 60s. We had, the pioneers here, as we did there, Chateau Grand Traverse being one of them, at O'Keefe, and then he was Old Mission, and then Bernie Rink was Boscadell on Leelanau Peninsula. A lot of support from Michigan State for us, Oregon State here, and putting in experimental vines, working with vinifera, working with hybrids, figuring out where the ideal and optimal places to plant and grow. They figured out that from shoreline to 25 miles is vinifera. Anything outside of that, you can't. It's too cold. Doesn't work. So what I will say about my interpretation of Michigan is they kind of planted, but what Traverse City did is they planted what people knew without really realizing what worked. Versus, and this is my opinion, versus Oregon that said, we are going to be Pinot Noir. It doesn't matter what happens. We are going to do this. We are going to be Pinot Noir. And it worked for them. And I think what Michigan, at least northern Michigan, is figuring out is kind of that movement away from things that aren't working or only work every other year, or out of every 2 years you have this optimal growing season, because they can do that. I mean, they've produced and are producing beautiful Cab Francs and Merlot and Pinot Noir, and people would be like, what? Like, Michigan, you grow wine? And they're outstanding. I had a tasting last night of all Michigan wines, and we had a 2020 Cab Franc and then a beautiful red blend from Black Star. I'm not plugging them. I promise. But it was Teraldigo, Lagrange, Cab Franc, and Merlot, which is just a kind of an interesting blend to begin with, but it gives you an idea of what they're doing. They're pushing it forward now. They're realizing this didn't work. We need to be focusing on stuff that we can consistently produce. So what does that mean? Cold, hardier red varietals like Gamay, like Teraldigo, Lemberger, some Dornfelder, so the Blaufränkisch is beautiful there. And then, the aromatic whites, Riesling is the winner. And if I could go back in time and be them, I would have just taken Riesling, like Oregon took Pinot, and said, we are going to be Riesling. And, upstate New York kind of did that. But I think just our layout's a little bit more conducive, and I think our profile is a little bit more kind of that Germanic. So for me at that time, it was just like world of wine, throw it at you, start learning. California, they weren't, growing things that we were obviously growing in Michigan. So that was kind of another, this is new. What are we doing? Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, Tannat, God, I've never even heard of some of these wines. And so that was just fun. And it's a whole different style of winemaking. They're varietals that, can be, I don't want to use the word beat up a little bit, but you can move them around a little bit more than you say would with Pinot. New Zealand, I think it was just getting to New Zealand and making wine in a different country. And I did work with Pinot there, and I did work with Chardonnay, but as you can imagine, it was, Sauvignon Blanc. And I love drinking Sauvignon Blanc, especially from New Zealand. I think aromatically, it is just stunning. And obviously coupled with the landscape of, the Marlborough Sound and the surrounding areas. I tried to get into Central Otago, and, true to Kiwis, you just never hear back. And I probably sent out, 20 or 30 emails. And I was with Babbage, which, is, I think still to this day, the largest owned and family operated winery and oldest in New Zealand. I was there for their 100th crush, which was pretty cool. And so we designed t-shirts and, did all that stuff. But it was fun. I was one of 18, and it was people from all over the world, some of which I'm still very good friends with, some of which I've brought here as interns and continued the fun, through harvest. But I knew I wanted to go to Oregon, and I knew I wanted to revisit Pinot. I have a love for Syrah. I do. I love it. But again, that challenge. Pinot is a challenging grape, and I was told that early on that if you can make good Pinot, then you'll do fine with other varietals. But to really master Pinot Noir. And so, I don't want to lie and say, I sussed out, Ponzi for that. But I had Ponzi before, and I did like their Luis's Pinots. And I think that kind of fit into me landing here. It was already in my mind, and, and I just kind of tried to build on that. I would love to see some Syrah move into the Valley and have the opportunity, if not here, side project or whatever, work with it. But for now, it's Pinot, Chardonnay, and taking it to the next level.
So tell me about your first impressions of Oregon and of the industry here.
Oh, amazing. Love nature, and there is an abundance of that here. That was like, we were sold, For Michigan, Traverse City specifically is stunning. It is stunning. But the magnitude of nature here, it's like, growing up, we have glacial moraines. So they call mountains. They're not mountains. They're very large hills. So I always try to describe it like, if you grow up skiing those, but then you're 16, you head to Colorado and you hit Vail or Steamboat, how do you ever go back to skiing a hill? That's kind of like the wilderness here. I'm avid fly fisherman and hiker and camper, and yes, you can do that in Michigan, but to this magnitude, you can't. So, stuck. The winemaking side of things, still learning about it. The community is huge, and it's great. And I of course have my pockets. It's fun to see the youth coming in. And I'm sure this is probably going to tie into something down the road, but it's interesting because what I am seeing is a shift from generational winemakers to a group of winemakers that aren't related to the families. And I think that poses a lot of very interesting questions, because when you look at the industry, you review the industry, what you add collaboration with families, with other winemakers, because it was necessary to grow, to be successful, to push the envelope. It was absolutely necessary to have think tanks, to get together all the time to discuss growing, winemaking, clones, I mean, whatever, everything. What the industry is today is because of that first generation, which passed it on to the second generation. And now what I'm seeing is that there is a stop, that some third generation aren't interested or have other things, which is absolutely fine. I mean, it is a commitment. It is what I view to be a life commitment, and to each their own. Everybody has their own path. So I think that's going to be interesting for the industry. There is a ton of talent here, and at least within my circle, individuals who are starting to take the reins or make some more decisions have been with their respective wineries for a good deal of time. It's not just we're bringing in from California or France or wherever and we're replacing these people. I think it's this conscious movement to pick and choose the right individuals to continue carrying that torch, but also continue pushing the industry forward. And because once you stop, then what? Then it's not exciting anymore. I've heard people say, once it's consistent, I'm gone. And I hear that. I mean, who wants to, I know I'm going to pick, in these 3 days at 26 bricks or whatever it is, that's not fun. That's not why we do it. You need a little bit of pressure. You need a little bit of stress. You need, that bleeds into the vintage and the wines, and, everything is it's all connected, which is cool. So I think as a community, need to continue getting together, need to continue these awesome events like the Chardonnay technical tasting, the Pinot Noir technical tasting, bringing back the aspects of Steamboat, getting these individuals involved, because you can't stop the conversations. What the first and second gen have done very well is progress this industry to a point where people feel like they don't need to collaborate anymore, but you can't do that. You have to keep going, because it will continue to change as we continue to get warmer. That is going to have a direct effect on everything, from growing, from new varietals moving in to, wines getting, more alcoholic, God forbid. It's like we're trying to go the opposite way. But there is a great community here, and people work together, and we saw that in 2020. I think, not that anybody wants to keep talking about 2020, not just necessarily with COVID, but with the fires, right? I mean, the collaborative efforts within the wine industry, and then extending out, like with the universities, literally turning their labs over for the wineries to submit samples and work with us, because they understood the time frame. They understood that this is unlike anything we have ever dealt with. And that extended out even further to national and internationally. Speaking with people in California, getting on the phone or Zoom with Australia, it just absolutely was amazing how quickly people came together, put everything to the side, despite, being in harvest, making the time. That just speaks to, humans being good humans, people understanding, people, working together and doing what they can to get people through, and karma's great, and hopefully it'll be, our turn at some point to return the favor. And but I think that year, despite all the crap that we went through, really defined this community, and how powerful it is and strong. And I think it was a good thing for people.
I'm curious about you mentioned obviously you come into a place that has a house style, a long defined style. Ponzi has been being made by two people since the beginning. Tell me about developing your own style over time and bringing what you're able to bring into the kind of the defined style here.
Yeah. So, Dick was a remarkable winemaker, and I think, Louisa's, what Pinot Noir was for Dick, Chardonnay is for Louisa. And I came in here with really no interest in Chardonnay, and I have learned to appreciate it and such a higher level and understanding, working with Louisa, working with the wine, and just truly getting to know it. And so that's one aspect is developing an appreciation for that varietal, because like Pinot Noir, it's delicate, and there are a lot of ways you can take it. And Louisa certainly has her own style, and Ponzi is one of the very few that kept going with Chardonnay. When most people either pulled it out, planted Pinot, or grafted over, or whatever, Ponzi was like, challenge accepted, we're going to do this. And Louisa is hands down one of the best Chardonnay makers in this valley. Stylistically, working with my first mentor, Lee, I don't want to say natural. It's natural, not natty. I think that's the best way to say it. And Julie and I worked that. It's probably going to become a Harvest t-shirt at some point. But it's more of stepping back and just observing, smelling, tasting, relying on your instinct, gut. That is what I started developing early on, and over the years have been kind of swaying back and forth. But it was the last couple years that it really set in, because Luis and I started working more intimately together, especially with the winemaking and decisions. And that's when I kind of realized, yeah, you've been doing this all along. And what I mean by that is, what we're doing is a very natural thing, right? It's a very natural process that even without humans, it will happen. And so as winemakers, my personal philosophy is that the wine is being made in the vineyard, and as a winemaker, as it comes in, you should be stewarding that, guiding it, right? That being said, as a winemaker, when things go awry, you should really have a set of tools to intervene when you need it. We have a very minimalistic or non-interventionist approach here. We're not inoculating. We are relying on native yeasts that are either living in here or coming in off the fruit or out of the vineyard. We are using temperature as a guide. We manage, cap twice a day, once in the morning. We have awesome equipment that we use, and we run really cool analysis, and we work with wine software. We don't rely on it. It's a guide. It's great for data collection, and to, if you want to go into those nerdy details and those aspects, we have all the means to do that. But stylistically, the winemaking is just natural. And it really is it's lucky. I'm lucky to have worked with somebody like Louisa, who has grown up with these vineyards, that knows this fruit, the site so well, that a lot of things just come where I will catch myself being a little bit reactive. Winemakers are emotionally reactive to things, where I'll be like, we should probably think about this. She's like, just wait, it's okay, or the rains are setting in. Little rain is not that bad. Now, if it's going to rain and continue to rain, then yeah, you start rethinking things and recalibrate. But it's been interesting observing that, and it's calmed me down a little bit, and I'm glad I'm doing this early on, because as you progress, you don't want those kind of aspects later on. You learn early, and I think it's important to really apply it, learn it, truly learn it. So I think there are a lot of similarities in our styles of winemaking. I've learned a great deal from her. I learned a great deal from JP, who was here prior to me, You kind of just pick things up along the way, and I don't know if you ever completely, this is it, I'm done, this is my style. I think that leads to a bit of boring. It's like the consistency thing. It's you don't always want the same. That's no fun. But being open to things, willing to try, being creative. I can certainly get into my mode of just this is what works. This is easy. So that's what I love about Louisa and Julia is there's a lot of challenging each other to think, to try new things. Them more so challenging me because what I do here is a lot of operational stuff. So it's really tapping back into that creativity, maintaining that creativity is super important. That being said, at the end of the day, there are expectations of style, that we are working to achieve and maintain. Our cuvées are built around that, from Tavola being, your everyday, very approachable, wonderful with food, bright, kind of, beautiful wine, to the Laurelwood, which is a little bit more serious, but, I call it seriously playful. But, your red fruits and kind of, spice, and then your reserves and single vineyard cuvées, which are certainly much warmer and deeper and richer, and, that fruit really coming from our older sites. The exposure to how I like to describe it to people is, Ponzi in itself is a window into the history of this valley, from the viticulture side of things to the winemaking, the result of that viticulture, to the hospitality experience. I mean, when they started, along with just the very few others, there were no tasting rooms. I mean, there were vineyards that some didn't know existed. Like, it was just there was nothing here. This did not exist, and Maria Ponzi really paving the way for this kind of thing. Offering a top-notch hospitality experience of fine wines and food pairings, and us, investing in our people to educate, be it WSET, be it continued education at Chemeketa or whatever. I mean, it's, the building out of Salud and providing healthcare. I mean, that's all Ponzi. That's to be a part of that is really amazing. I don't know, I feel good to be a part of that. It brings me a lot of pride that I can say I've been here. So, it's a lot of history, and to be a part of that and continue to help continue the legacy for them is great. It's fun.
Tell me about the progression of your role here. You mentioned the various titles you've had. Tell me about additional responsibilities, additional kind of projects you've taken on in the time you've been here, and give us an idea of sort of the main focus now on kind of how your typical day, typical week goes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm kind of in between Juliet and Louisa as a cellar associate, cellar rat as we call it. You're down there. You're doing everything. You're moving wine, blending wine, cleaning tanks, cleaning drains, topping barrels, and it's great. You got to do it. It is a ladder. This is an industry that is a ladder, and you have to climb it, and most of the time it takes longer than you want. But once you get to that rung, or rungs, it is worth it because you've progressed and you've learned. The amount that you learn and what, some at some point in their career is like, God, why am I still doing this? And then it comes and you're like, oh, here I am, and then you keep going. It's just, it's comical and it's frustrating, but if you love it, you stick with it and it works. So, from there, you're kind of doing the work. And then as you progress, Cellar Master, it's more of managing the work being done, still doing it, but managing, and then creating the work as you grow older and higher, and then overseeing it, kind of bigger picture. So for me, what my life looks like is, working with Julia a lot on making sure that the day-to-day stuff is happening. We are sitting down, we meet. Communication is everything, right? So we have time scheduled with Louisa. We have morning meetings. We make, at the beginning of the week to make sure that last week is discussed and going forward is discussed. And then it, kind of falls into Julie and I's court, and we start ideating and making plans just to keep things going, moving. With her solely in control of the lab. She's coordinating the lab work. We have another cellar associate / lab associate that helps with running the analysis, providing that for us to look at, to kind of make sure that we're, on the right track and the wines are being taken care of the way that they should. So that's kind of the wine side of things. When it comes to Luis and I, a lot of spreadsheets. A lot of watching budgets, making, setting budgets, working with the board. So we have a CEO now. We have a CFO. So working with them on the bigger picture stuff, right? So CapEx projects, we've got a lot of those in the works. Ponzi purchased about 100 acres last year of land that we're going to start planting starting in fall of 24. And so that for me is super important, because the building out a vineyard I've never done. And that is very interesting to me. And so I am working as much as I can, as much as time allows, with Louisa on that project. So we bought just about 22 acres just across the street here, coming down Mountain Home Road. And then we bought about 80 acres over Cornelius, I guess, technically is where it's at. Still Laurelwood, but it's the boundary line of the Laurelwood and the Chehalem Mountains. Beautiful site, high elevation. It's stunning. So that I'm very excited about, because, I've worked in vineyards. I've torn out, compromised vines and planted new ones. I've, worked on irrigation, trellising, I've pruned, I've picked, I've done it, but I've never really planned it, and I'm a planner, love planning. And so that's, I'm looking forward to that, and seeing what that looks like. And, cause it bleeds into here, right? I mean, if you're planning a vineyard, you got to start planning tank space. How are you going to build those blocks, and it's just this new world of thinking and ways of thinking that just was I didn't know. And now eyes are open, and now it's amazing. So, it's busy. Always on some project. If it's a day to day, week to week, or a month to month, or year to year, it's something going on. But that's what makes it exciting and fun, and keeps you in it. You
talked earlier about the place and about the need to kind of set down your own roots and get to know a place. Tell me about this place and the process of getting to know it so far. How do you feel about your knowledge of it, and what is sort of the next steps in that?
Yeah, always learning. that's very, probably be an element of this conversation. Always learning. But for me, so the Ponzi family were planting about every decade. And so again, going into that kind of window or history, you see the progression of viticulture within the Willamette Valley, but notably the Laurelwood district, right? And so that AVA came online in 2020. It is something that Louisa, Maria, and a handful of others worked very hard and tirelessly to get recognized, and part of the Willamette Valley. And all the Ponzi Vineyards are, with the exception of the historic estate, are in the Laurelwood soil profile. And so I've been here long enough to have tasted all the other nested AVAs. I'm most familiar with the Laurelwood. In my time here, Isimo is our newest planting that was started in 2018, and it's just set up here above the winery. But for me, where I started really paying attention was this site, Avellana, and compared to Aurora, which is literally just on that hillside. You can see it, and that's Dick and Nancy's home site. Vine, and everybody has their own interpretation, but vines for me, it's kind of like they're growing, it's like children, right? Kids. We were all a kid, and we all had this weird stage where you're either a little gangly or overweight or whatever, right? And then all of a sudden you hit this point where you come into yourself, and that's like you've grown up, right? And and how I perceive it, I was here for a little bit of that weirdness, gangliness for Avalana, and now it's really coming in to itself. And what I mean by that is it's progressed far enough where it's starting to tap into that, that basalt layer, when Aurora was already there. And I've watched kind of Avalana progress up to that level of quality, that style, that profile of, what Aurora is now, what, Madrona and Abatina, which are some of the earliest sites planted in the early 80s. So it's this progression. And then Isimo, and you're comparing Isimo, which is the youngest Pinot in Laurelwood. And so we've got this lineup that's pretty cool that most wineries don't have. And then we source fruit, from all over the valley. We have growers that those relationships extend during the Dick days, and most are long-term relationships. We will pick up a new vineyard every year or so and try it out and see, and that's supporting the community, and there's new vineyards popping up all the time. So it's always good to keep it fun and fresh. So we'll pick up one or two here and there. But you never want a house palette, obviously. But stylistically, in terms of the viticulture, it's cool because it allows you a lot of flexibility in your blending, and you would assume that every year that Madrona, Abatina, Linda Vista would just default to reserve, but sometimes they don't, because whatever the vintage is, they're a bit brighter. This is more Laurelwood-esque, for that wine. Everything is intentional. It's not that kind of cascading, well, if this isn't reserved, then it's this, and if this isn't this, then it's this. No, all these wines are crafted with purpose and intention. And again, another thing that some wineries don't have that flexibility. And then obviously, again, having Luisa's, life involvement in these wines, and literally, planting some of these vineyards herself, and working with Miguel, our vineyard manager, who's coming on up to 30 years now with the family. Worked with Dick and and Luisa, and just probably the expert of Laurelwood soils. We have a full-time vineyard crew of, they think, around 15 people, most of which have been with the company for a long time. With the family for a long time. All of our either Ponzi owned or Ponzi family owned is managed by the same crew. We're not venturing out into other parts of the valley. It's all home. It's all here, right here. What you see right here. It's all kept connected and collected here. So
you talked earlier about sustainability, especially in some of the roles you've had. So tell me about sort of the role of sustainability in your mind, and the role you have, and how you bring something like that to an operation of this size.
Yeah, so my part in sustainability here has always been mainly in the packaging world of things, which I've touched on, and it's rather boring, but it is what it is. So quickly recapping, looking at alternative weights to glasses. Types of closures that have some sort of recycled material built in. Corrugation needs, so, are you going with craft versus, content, where recycled to virgin material is, whatever it is, which is huge. I mean, it all plays a part, right? But the Ponzi family has some would say, has been farming organically since day one, hand hoeing, not using pesticides, not because it was cool to do that. It's just, that's what you do. That's the right thing to do. And I think everybody's, and obviously this is my opinion and mine alone, but it's good that people are doing it, but there are people that are doing it simply to market it. which plays both sides. I mean, I get it, but you know, the family and a lot of others do it because it's the right thing to do. So Ponzi's Vineyards have been, you know, live certified for a long time, since the 90s. The winery was live certified for a while, fell off. And then we recertified a couple years ago. Julia has really taken that on and has done a great job. Group Bollinger, it is huge. CSR is huge. Sustainability is huge. So, you know, what our future looks like. Well, let me back up. So in terms of production, we're not using anything that can't go down the drain. We're not doing anything that needs to be, you know, treated and then go down. You know, we will monitor our pH levels of our water in case, you know, a brute of something wasn't, you know, mixed up properly and we have an elevated pH or whatever. And at that point we would adjust and make sure. But there's nothing that we do here that can't go back into the ground, on top of the soil, nothing. Low intervention. And our, you know, we're spraying up at Aurora, you know, even then it's sulfur, that's it. No herbicides, no pesticides, something like that. You know, we capture rain, goes into a reservoir, which is on the other side of the winery. You know, but going forward, we have a solar array. We are going to build that out to become, you know, neutral in terms of energy consumption. We are looking into water, you know, gray water treatment, recycling. So anything, you know, doesn't matter, is being treated on property, going back into the system. Farming, you know, there are always new certifications coming up, and I do not have a ton of responsibility in the viticultural side of things. That is certainly more Louisa. She is our director of winemaking and viticulture. So, but you know, we are live certified, but we're now going to become certified organic here at Avellana. It's going to be very easy because we already are. We just don't have the certification, so it's paperwork. But it's this other cert that's like organic regenerative, and I can't remember the term. I don't deal with this stuff. But it's the idea of really focusing on, you know, the soil and making sure that the soil is good, and it's starting from there up into the vine, not just looking at the vine top down. It's, you know, soil up, vine, which makes sense. I mean, it's all kind of intuitive, you know, and but I think that that cert allows for, you know, vintage variation. You know, you have a bad year and you have to save your crop. You have to have some sort of flexibility, right, to you know, protect yourself. So the environment has always come first in you know, Ponzi's mind, and yeah, it's great to be a part of that, and a community that is so focused on making sure that we do not destroy this. You know, you can't. It's too beautiful. So
you've touched on it already, but I'm curious about the transition with the purchase by Bollinger a couple of years back. Yeah. Tell me about sort of the transition time, and how you now that you're on the other side of it, how it looks being part of that company.
Sure. Yeah, it was a surprise to the staff. I'm sure it was a surprise to the Valley. I know Bollinger was looking for a while, and you know, I can't speak to the inner workings of that because I was not involved. But from my side of things, to be a part of an acquisition in general is an interesting thing. You know, it's a turbulent thing. I look at it as an ocean with a lot of tides and currents, and when you think you're out of one, you're back into another. But it's a learning opportunity. It's a very unique learning opportunity, and if you're around to experience it, you know, because some people don't want anything to do with it. Some people will leave, some people are let go, some people are promoted, some people are demoted, like whatever. You know, it's a whole different take on a company. Luckily, you know, I retained, you know, my position and have been, you know, a part of a lot of things that were happening in the immediate, and then also going forward. It's been a great learning opportunity to see a company operate on a higher level. Obviously, you know, for 51 years, it was family owned and operated. And what I observed was two sisters working together to continue, the legacy and leave their own individual, thumbprint on their lives here and in the community. And for Bollinger to come in, it just elevated that, right? So there's more resources. There's, it's a bigger group. You've got more people to talk to and more people kind of interacting. But what I will say is nice is, Ponzi's kind of this island because we're their only U.S. acquisition. And so that allows us to kind of continue what we're doing because clearly what we were doing was enough, to get their attention and to ultimately purchase us. There are always thoughts and opinions, and of course things will be implemented, and of course things will change. But again, change is good, and for me, great learning opportunity, great opportunity to meet new people and have the ability to explore different ideas and different ways of seeing things and doing things, and just being a part of the continuation of the legacy because they understand how important that is. They understand and respect how the Ponzis have been farming for years. I mean, there were so many shared morals and values and likenesses between the families that it seemed like the right thing to do was to mesh and become one. So yeah, I'm curious to see how far they're going to take it, because there's some cool things in the works that I think will bring a whole new edge to what we're doing here. So.
Well, with that said, let's talk about the future a little bit. We'll start with the future of Ponzi. What kind of on the horizon here that you're excited about, and are there sort of new projects or new things coming along that you will be part of?
Yeah, every year's a little bit different. I think as Luisa's future is kind of untold right now. I don't know what is really the plan there. Working with her a lot though is nice. Spending more time because as my position continues to elevate, that reliance on her to make sure things are happening, the right way and how she wants them is super important, right? We're continuing to build out our experience here at Ponzi. Bringing Ponzi back to top of mind. It's hard to stay relevant when there's over 800 brick and mortar wineries in the valley and X amount more that are just labels. I mean, there's so many people here doing, which is awesome because they were some of the people that started it. But Bollinger's goal is to really elevate this experience. Ponzi's goal, I should say. Really focus on the wines that we're making, refine the portfolio, make this place where people there's no question, this is where you go. And I think we can do that, absolutely. Our location to Portland makes it super convenient, and it's kind of a gateway into the valley, and coupled with the history and then the flash of the new ownership, it's there are a lot of cool things. I already mentioned the vineyards. That I'm very excited about that, just because it's not. I've been doing this. I've been involved with wine in some capacity for 16 years now. 15 or 16 years. And this kind of vineyard part is starting to tie in my package, right? It's one thing that there's a hole there, and now I'm trying to fill that. I'm trying to learn that, and so working with Luisa, working with the vineyard management company that she's chosen to help us build out the Winters Road location will be interesting, because it's just an area that I'm unfamiliar with. So I'm very excited about that. Stepping up in harvest and working more with the fruit rather than running the day-to-day of harvest, is exciting. To start making more decisions is exciting. I will never. I don't want to be at a desk, man. I have a hard time not being on the floor. It's my management style is work with, not over. I think that creates a lot of respect, especially in the cellar when it's high energy and, people are run thin and emotions are whatever they are because they change daily or hourly or whatever. But we've got a great team here, and we bring in a lot of talent from all over the world, which is fun. So I think the future is bright here, and what my role is in that future is kind of still TBD, but I'm happy to live in the present and be a part of what's happening now, and continuing forward, looking forward to harvest. So.
Well, let's talk about the future of Oregon wine industry then a little bit. You've talked kind of about the changes you've seen and about sort of the need to stay communicative and stay collegial. What do you see coming for the Oregon wine industry? What's next here?
Well, there's certainly that transition that I talked about. I think that's going to be interesting to observe. Quality of wines, what happens within the community, because you've got these other generations that are still really the drivers of it. And I'm fortunate to know a few of them and be, not in their circle, but around enough to hear the conversation, and which gets me thinking, which is good. It's that exposure of what's going to happen, and I'm sure it's scary, because what their parents built and what they continued to build on, I mean, it's a baby, and I can't imagine that fear, because I'm sure it exists, However, I think that there are some great individuals in this valley that will do a good job carrying that torch, but I think there's other elements to it that, what created this needs to continue. I think I said it well, is, the feeling of we got there should never be even a thought. Because then it just, I don't want to say it dies, but then you lose that community, you lose that collaboration. And I think with the changing environment, I think that will kind of be the catalyst to continue those conversations. I think sustainability, I think opening the industry up to be more inclusive of different peoples, pushing that forward. Oregon in general has always been a driver of progress. No matter what it is, it doesn't matter, it's progress, So I think navigating that, it will be interesting, and seeing who really wants to be involved and who doesn't. And so, it's an ongoing conversation, always. Be it here or outside grabbing beers or whatever, it's how can these individuals, continue on. Other varietals, I mean, we get warmer, things are going to come in, and as winemakers, you want to, yes, we make great Pinot and Chard, but you're always like, what else can we do? Prior to the acquisition, we were doing Dolcetto and Arnase and Pinot Blanc, and I mean, it's, as a winemaker, it's what you want. You want to, make a bunch of different stuff and have fun, but you got to sell it, and it's hard sometimes, and you don't want to put it on them and be like, hey, I made all this whatever, and now you got to sell it. It doesn't really make sense, what we're doing with our portfolio, but you got to sell it. Well, that's where side projects come in, and you bring in a little bit of fruit, you make a little bit of wine, and either just keep it for yourself or give it to family and friends or try to sell it. I mean, making wine's pretty easy. Selling it's the hard part. But I don't know. I think that whatever the future is for the industry, I feel it to be bright and not dark. Just, to TBD, right? To be determined.
Talk a little bit about your own future here. I'm curious, beyond just work here, what else are you looking ahead to? You mentioned kind of playing around with other varietals. Do you have a side project in mind? Do you have other kind of growth opportunities in mind?
Yep. Yeah, I do have a side project. I have a very small little label that I wanted to do in 2020, but that didn't happen. Luckily, I was working with a family some fruit out in Yosemite that were totally cool, and I said, look, I want the fruit still. Can I just roll my contract? I paid a little bit to cover some farming costs because crop insurance is expensive, but yeah, I rolled it at 21 and brought in a little bit of Gamay. My label is Grumio, which is my middle name and my late mother's maiden name, and so it's kind of paying homage to her and the family name. Small production, and it's not exclusively to Gamay. I don't know if I'm going to do something this year. Just depends on how busy you are and how much extra money you got. So yeah, I love the kind of pet project stuff, and Julia has hers here too, Little Hellion, and I help working with her, helping her is always fun. She's full bore on that project, which is good. We just actually put her 22 vintage to bottle last week. Last week it was. So we did our tirage bottling for our Ponzi 22 vintage, and we always do Little Hellion at that time too. So that's pretty cool that we are allowed to have our little fun. Growing that, I don't know. Also TBD, how much time do I have? I wish our days were 48 hours and not 24.
Just anything else you're looking ahead to, whether it's in wine or beyond?
Work what we've discussed. I'd love to buy some land out here, and that'd be fun. But no, fishing, camping, enjoying the summer as much as I can, and that's pretty much it.
So the last question for you is, if you were to talk to someone who was interested in joining the Oregon wine industry, what would your advice or words of wisdom to them be?
Ooh. Understand you're going to work hard. Understand that you need thick skin. It's an intense environment, and sometimes it can be too intense. But at the end of the day, we are part of something that, as I mentioned before, humans have been doing for a long time. It's a job that is grounded in nature and cultivation and craft and artistry, of creativity. I mean, there are so many rewarding things that you do certainly have to work for, but once you get there, at whatever stage that is for you, whatever there is, it's so worth it. Yes, there is a burnout rate, and but I think it's how you manage your time and your personal health, and go camping, go fishing, go travel, go do pottery, whatever it is that you do, find that balance. It isn't all about work. But as I learned very early on, my dad said, if you love doing it, you'll never work a day in your life. I love doing it. I'm certainly working, but certainly working. But I do love it, and that helps take the edge off a little bit. You don't make much money. Don't expect that, or else you're always going to be pissed off and upset, and you will grow resentful. It's not about it. It's not one of those careers that is about that. It looks like it is, and there's certainly money involved, but it's not about that. And if you're in it for that, you've picked the wrong thing, because you'll be angry a lot. And just have fun, travel, learn. Not everything requires a college education. You can certainly pick up a wealth of knowledge by just going to a different country, working with different winemakers, hanging out with other people, talking, collaborating. It's a bit non-traditional, and certainly you can make it as non-traditional as you want. Traditional is boring, so, keep it fun, keep it light, work hard, be safe, and, there's a lot to gain from it.
All right. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask? Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover?
I think so.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your stories, this beautiful space. Thank you to all the birds for providing a bevy of background.
I know, right?
Appreciate that as well.
We got blackbirds that live in here. We've got little. Oh, look at you. Yep. We got hummingbirds. I mean, whatever. We get the falcons in here.
His voice defies his size, I would say.
Totally.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. I'll go ahead and let you off the hook.